Hello and good morning. This is Drew Hudson from Beyond Extreme Energy. I am sitting just outside of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where this morning for about the next hour or a little bit more, we're going to be broadcasting a live people's hearing about the dangers of fracking and fracked gas transportation and storage in particular. We're doing this because FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, you can see their office behind me here just a little ways down the block. Just make out their sign in the background there. FERC is holding a special hearing today on the Aliso Canyon frack gas storage facility in California. Folks may remember that this was a facility that experienced a dramatic and unplanned leak, essentially a rupture in one of the very large storage tanks they have there. And the leak went on uncontrolled for several weeks. They had to evacuate large parts of a nearby neighborhood called Porter Ranch. And eventually, for a time at least, that leak was the largest source of global warming pollution in all of California, just that one facility. The hearing that FERC is having today, however, does not focus on the public health or environmental impacts of Aliso Canyon or gas storage projects like it. Instead, they're focused mostly on how to get back to business as usual, whether or not they need to charge customers more money, have a rate increase of some kind, and how to go back to refilling Aliso Canyon with stored natural gas power plants and cooling systems and all kinds of things across Southern California. So we'll be hearing over the next hour or so from a variety of experts and frontline communities who can talk about the impacts of fracking from the wellhead in the shale fields of Pennsylvania, along the transmission lines and pipelines that move the gas from where it is fracked to a variety of markets, as well as from folks who are living next to either existing gas storage facilities or planned gas storage facilities about the particular risks of storing large amounts of fracked gas in a single place. So we'll hear all kinds of different testimony from a variety of different folks over the next hour. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Our first guest will be Dr. Robert Howarth from upstate New York. He's going to talk a little bit about climate change impacts of fracked gas. But before we get started, we're waiting. There are actually folks inside FERC right now, inside the hearing from Beyond Extreme Energy, listening to what FERC has to say, speaking out and representing the voice of the public inside the meeting, even though there was no time given to the public to testify on the impacts of frack gas storage and this facility in particular during the meeting. So folks are availing themselves of their free speech rights inside of a meeting that they were not entirely invited to speak out in. We're giving them a few minutes to finish what they're doing and clear the room before we get started with our webcast and hear from our panel of people's experts over the next hour or so. Again, my name is Drew Hudson from Beyond Extreme Energy. We're broadcasting live from just outside FERC, and we'll be on for about the next 2 hours talking about fracking, frack gas storage, and FERC's failure to regulate gas infrastructure all around the country. Stand by, and we'll get going with our first guests here in just a few minutes. Good morning. How are you? I can. Hang on 1 minute, and I'm going to put you on to the live cast. Okay, joining us live now via Skype is Dr. Robert Howarth to talk about some of the climate change impacts in particular of fracked gas. and the way that gas storage often leaks and other parts of the gas infrastructure often leak, causing a major impact on climate change, which was, as I said, one of the main things we saw at Aliso Canyon was that for a brief time, at least, it became one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in California, just from this one facility leaking. But the truth is that there are many leaking facilities all over the country in gas storage, transportation, and all parts of the fracking life cycle process. And so here to talk a little bit more about that is Dr. Howarth. Good morning.
Let me just give a little bit of background on methane and how it plays out with shale gas. Natural gas is mostly methane. Shale gas is just natural gas that's coming from shale formations by fracking. So it too is mostly methane. And methane is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. It's more than 100-fold more potent than carbon dioxide. So if we put even in small amounts into the atmosphere, it's a big whammy. It turns out that when we use any natural gas, we're leaking some methane into the atmosphere. And the best data suggests that from the time they drill a well all the way through delivery to customer, for conventional natural gas, a little bit less than 4% of that is either leaked or purposely vented into the atmosphere. It isn't all just accidental. For shale gas, what we're seeing is it's more like 12%, some 3 times higher. And in fact, we can see that space satellite data show that the methane emissions globally have increased since we started developing shale gas 5 to 10 years ago. Most of the global increase in methane has come from the United States. So shale gas is a big problem. Coming out of the United Nations COP21 talks in Paris last year, the nations of the world said we need to keep the planet below 1.5 degrees Celsius of the pre-industrial baseline. We want to protect the planet. That's what we really need to do. That's a challenge, and they weren't quite up to the challenge. So what they said we'd do instead is keep the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius. Well, it turns out, given current warming trends, the last year, each of the months of the last year have been the warmest ever on record. We're warming faster than the climate models even think. We're on trajectory to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius in 12 years or less. This isn't some far off period. If we want to keep the planet well below 2 degrees Celsius, we need to move away from fossil fuels now. And that's not just coal, it's natural gas. Now, industry loves to tell you that when you burn natural gas, it's putting less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than coal. You get the same amount of energy. That's true, but you're putting a lot more methane into the atmosphere. And when you look at that methane's influence as well as carbon dioxide, shale gas is actually the worst of any of the fossil fuels we might be using now from a climate change standpoint. If we want to really do what the COP21 agreement says, we need to move away from shale gas as quickly as possible. In terms of where the gas leaks are coming from, some of it's at the well site, a lot of it's in pipelines. Some of the compressors that are used in pipelines purposefully vent gas to the atmosphere. Pipelines leak beyond that, and when you clean pipelines out for maintenance, all the gas that's in there is usually vented to the atmosphere. Storage facilities leak. As you say, the Aliso Canyon was a complete disaster, a massive amount of methane going up at once. But these facilities typically leak, and one of the concerns I have is precisely how we store gas. Aliso Canyon was never really designed to store gas. It was an old oil field. There are vacant wells there that serves as a cheap, convenient way to store gas, but also a recipe for the sort of disaster that occurred. We can predict these sort of things will happen again. Here, I'm in New York State, about 15 miles from where I am at the moment. There's a natural gas storage facility that is growing. It's an old salt mine run by a Crestwood, Texas company. That's another disaster just waiting to happen. This is a crazy way to be storing gas. These facilities were never designed to do that. They're just big underground vacant spaces, not at all well equipped to hold the gas.
Thank you. That's a great overview of the problem. Agencies like FERC that do have oversight over the gas transmission and infrastructure process should be doing to take more into account the climate change impacts from, for example, leaking methane, which we know is such a huge problem.
One of the problems is simply how the United States government is accounting for the methane leakage totally. They rely on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. EPA has a approved protocol for going out and sort of measuring leaks in various pipeline segments, joints, etc., heading them all up. It's quite clear that they've been systematically underestimating the extent of methane emissions. They now say that across the United States, the amount of methane leakage in the natural gas industry is something like 2% of what comes from the well to final consumer. And as I say, it's at least twice as much for conventional gas and probably 6 times more for fracked gas. We have excellent data now of that from satellite data from airplane flyovers and things. One of the problems with EPA estimates is that they've been relying on an instrument that's proven to fail frequently and give low estimates. There's Touche Howard, who's the patent holder on the EPA-approved instrument, has written extensively on it over the last couple of years. He's joined with NC Warren of Durham, North Carolina, to file a formal whistleblower charge against the EPA for not disclosing problems with this instrument and allowing this poor data to continue to be used by FERC and other agencies. That's part of the problem. The other issue is how we look at methane over time. Methane is a problem for a decade or so, and then it's gone from the atmosphere. So it's 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide, what's in the atmosphere. But unlike carbon dioxide, which will have an influence for centuries to come, the methane itself is gone in a decade. So that's the good news. Well, EPA follows a protocol that was set up decades ago under the Kyoto Protocol to compare methane and carbon dioxide only at a 100-year time period. And at that, they're using old data. So they are systematically discounting, if you will, the short-term problems of methane. And they're doing so by a factor of at least 4 to 5, something like that. So you throw in the fact that they are underaccounting the extent of methane leakage, and they are not properly accounting for methane's role as an immediate climate warmer, and they're at least 10 to 20-fold off in their estimation of the problem. That means FERC is relying on bad information. If we want to solve climate change, if we want to reach this well below 2 degrees Celsius target, we have got to reduce methane emissions. In fact, the climate responds very quickly to reductions in methane emissions. We can actually meet the COP21 target by doing so. We cannot do so simply by relying on carbon dioxide because there are lags in the climate system, and we are going to blow through 2 degrees Celsius in 30 to 35 years from now if we rely on a CO2-only focus and look just at coal. So we need to look at methane. Shale gas is the biggest source of methane in the United States. FERC really needs to step up and do a far better job than they've done today.
Great, thank you. And one last question. We know that a number of the rules around gas leakage, gas flaring, as it's called, intentionally burning off excess gas, and also just a way that federal agencies consider climate change impacts have all been changing just in the last couple months. Towards the end of the Obama administration, there seems to have been a push on to try and clean up some of the methane leakage, to try and create some rules. So we've seen draft rules around existing gas facilities, proposed rules around new gas facilities. None of these things are quite finalized yet. And then most recently, we've had some new guidance out of the Council of Environmental Quality suggesting that all federal infrastructure agencies take into account the climate change impacts of projects that they consider. Again, we haven't quite seen the follow through on that. I wouldn't say any of those are really fully in effect yet, but there does seem to be an interest from this administration in pushing those goals forward. What do you think we'll see in the next couple months as we have a change in the presidential administration, and what can citizens do to help keep the pressure and the attention on these agencies to make sure that they're regulating leaking methane?
Well, you did a very nice job of summarizing what the Obama administration is looking at now. And, they've come to this interest in methane fairly late in the game, quite frankly. If you go back 4 or 5 years ago, they were completely discounting the importance of methane in climate change and also role of fracked gas in contributing to methane. That's changed, and it's changed because of the COP21 Paris agreement. It was clear coming out of Paris that you need to reduce methane emissions to do it again. The White House had representatives there. They clearly got it. I spoke with some of them while we were in Paris together. So they are moving now. Giving guidance to agencies like FERC to do a better job with it is critical. I think regulations help, but the regulations are going to be hard to enforce. Methane is a odorless, invisible gas. You can't see it with the naked eye. And so it is easy to leak and vent it without people realizing that. So I'm not optimistic that we can simply solve the problem through regulation. But having FERC realize that leaks are a huge problem. I think that's just a huge step in the right direction. I hope they pick up on this. But to me, the real solution, I don't believe we can necessarily reduce the methane leakage to the point where still it won't be a problem. We could perhaps cut it in half, still be a massive problem. So I think we really need to think heavily about moving away from natural gas and embracing this century we're living in. Energy efficiency, using heat pumps, using renewable electricity from solar and wind. And it is crazy, in my opinion, to allow this expansion of gas pipelines and oil pipelines that we're seeing in the United States now from fracked gas and oil. And those pipelines are built to have a usable lifetime. Well, we can't use them for 50 years. We can't use them for even 10 years. So we shouldn't be allowing them to be built. That's a really poor use of our societal resources.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll obviously have lots more to say about fracked gas and its impact on climate change when we talk to other callers throughout. But thank you, Dr. Howarth, for being here. You too. So hello again, Drew Hudson from Beyond Extreme Energy. That was Dr. Robert Howarth talking about the climate change impacts of gas and particularly gas storage facilities like Aliso Canyon. Next, we're going to hear from some folks who've actually been inside the FERC hearing earlier this morning. Ellen, you want to come around this side a little bit? Hang on while we rearrange ourselves a little bit here. We'll try and get on camera, two of us. It's okay. We got a microphone, so it's not.
You thought about it, but I just wanted to mention.
Okay. So joining us now, Ellen Barfield, another Beyond Extreme Energy member, who was actually in the hearing a little earlier today and was able to hear some of what FERC and Cal ISO and the folks inside the room were talking about, and made a little bit of trouble for them as well. So, Ellen, tell us what happened.
Well, first of all, we were quite surprised. The 5 of us went in. 4 of us had been what we call blue dotted at previous monthly FERC so-called public hearings, which are, of course, are not public at all. The public can sit there quietly and listen, but comment and no input from anybody who could be called the public. So we weren't entirely sure they'd even let us in, but they did. And we popcorn style spoke out, until they dragged us out of the room. I wouldn't say dragging. I didn't see any aggression today. They were just calmly escorting us out, hand firmly on arm. 2 of us had banners. They had taken mine away, and sadly, Steve's banner was upside down, which might cause a little more attention paid to it. The banner said something about FERC fails again, focusing on corporate profits, not people's safety. And basically that's what we all said. What I said was, you people are fiddling while the earth is burning. You could have used this opportunity to focus on shifting away from fossil fuels, away from natural gas, to green energy instead of working to get Aliso Canyon filled again. And as I got outside the door, I just started chanting, close Aliso Canyon, and I did have my whistle with me. They didn't take that, so I was whistling, and toot, toot, toot. It bothers them. They really don't like it, obviously, because we've been doing it for quite a while, but they're obviously not so careful as to weed us out of every hearing they have, which was interesting. We continued to impress upon the commissioners, 2 of whom were there and made brief welcoming remarks. And maybe others will trickle in as the day progresses. I expect they will. So that was good. We keep reminding them they could do a different job of shifting to green instead of keeping fossils flowing. And there were about 30 people in the, well, 25 minus us in the audience, not a lot. this is part of what we do. Bother FERC, know that we're not going away. Also help the public know that FERC even exists and what a lousy job it's doing. So, you know, it was really good to be here, really good to put in another little poke in the ribs to the FERC folks about how they could do a good job instead of the very bad job they're doing now. Thanks.
And you were there. What were some of the things that they were talking about? I heard they were asking questions about sort of rates and efficiency, the operation of Aliso Canyon. What kind of thing? Give us a sense of what they were talking about before we disrupted things.
They had some projection slides, which they gave us copies of, talking about how lucky they were this summer, that there weren't any horrendously hot days. So without the Aliso Canyon gas electric generation didn't get all sucked dry and have to have brownouts. They didn't mention a thing about efficiency or about the fact that California has a good bit of green energy already. Nothing about that. Just that we were lucky that our natural gas didn't run out. Giving details of exactly how much every day they thought they'd need and how much they actually needed, and how, thank goodness, there wasn't a horribly hot day. You know, just terribly narrow blinkered thinking. Grow up and come into the 21st century, but they're just not there. They're just doing business as usual, and they got to get beyond that. It was as expected, but really depressing. The same old, same old. Come on, y'all. It's the 21st century now. We got to do something different, but they just don't get it yet.
Well, that's definitely a consistent theme we've seen with FERC is whenever there's a gas project considered, they assume that the right thing is to build the gas project, and they take industry's word for it about the need for the project. So in the case of Aliso Canyon, they're essentially taking the operator's word for it that we have to have this gas, that it was the only way to keep the lights on. And they're not pushing the industries they regulate or the independent operators, folks who run the electricity markets, to make sure that we're moving more towards renewable energy and efficiency, as you say, which would be much better alternatives. I know there's also a commissioners meeting coming up next week. Tell us a little bit about it, because this is not exactly the first time Beyond Extreme Energy has been to FERC. And as you say, not the first time that we've been walked out of the building, many of us at least. Tell us a little bit about why Beyond Extreme Energy keeps coming back to FERC meetings and keeps using this tactic of standing up and speaking essentially uninvited. Why is that something we keep doing?
Well, it's not really BXC's focus, but it could be a focus, maybe the big greens focus, who tend to do a better job of a bad thing. Yes, in the short run, a better job of a bad thing is better than the worst job they're doing now. Actually, when the FERC was created, 40 some odd years ago, there was supposed to be a facilitated ability for the public to actually at least speak and be heard. That never was developed. They just never did it, but it's still on the books, and that would be something they could do. It would at least show them, and they would document, presumably, that basically everyone in the public, except the few poor jerks who still work in the fossil fuel industry, you know, basically the public says, good God, of course we've got to go to green energy. The sooner the better. Why didn't we do it long ago? So, you know, we keep poking and reminding them that is something they could do. Their jobs could last indefinitely, helping the nation shift over. Wouldn't that be a great thing? They just can't and won't see that yet, but we keep poking them. And again, as I said, a lot of the value of Beyond Extreme Energy continuing to focus on the FERC is that FERC used to be a deeply held secret. Nobody knew. What? There is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What do they do? Why? We're getting it out to the public that this stupid office exists and that they could do something very different. And if there's enough public pressure, maybe someday they will. So it's both bothering them at home, at their offices, through Congress when we do that and help frontliners do that, but also helping the public to understand that there is an agency that could do a good job of helping us shift. And they're right now not in any way doing that. They're continuing to hang on with just as hard as their little fist can hang to the old way of doing things. And we want to help them see the light. We want to help them see the light and shift, help us all shift.
Thanks very much. That's Ellen Barfield, another Beyond Extreme Energy member who was inside the hearing earlier inside the FERC building just behind us and was giving us a report on what's been going on here today at FERC and why we keep coming back to disrupt these meetings at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is no longer a secret clandestine agency. We've made them famous, if nothing else. Here they are live on the internet. Great. Well, thanks, Ellen. We're going to shift next here. Our next guest is going to be Nancy LaPlaca, who works with NC Warn, group Dr. Howarth was talking about as well, and is working to fight a series of gas projects in North Carolina and other places as well. Hang on 1 minute, and we'll bring Nancy LaPlaca on. Stand by 1 minute. We're just calling up Nancy.
Hi, Drew. Hello, Drew. Can you see me now and hear me?
Hey, how are you?
Good. I'm doing great. Sorry about that little snafu there. Happy to join you. And
yes,
so glad that you're there.
Yes. Go ahead.
So I'd like to address a couple issues that other people have brought up, and I know we've been at NC Warn so happy to work with Dr. Howarth. And as Ellen and other people have brought up, there's a lot we're ignoring here. We're ignoring cumulative impacts. We're ignoring evidence of very high decline rates in the shale fields. We're ignoring, of course, all of the pollution. We're ignoring what the citizens want. We're ignoring the fact that efficiency, solar, wind, that we have lots of alternatives. We're ignoring the fact that all this infrastructure that's being built, an estimated 300 gas plants across the country, all these pipelines, they're supposed to be working for 35 or more years. And as Ellen said, that ain't gonna happen. We've got high methane leakage rates, and the system has been gamed for some time. And they started with the Energy Policy Act by exempting fracking from the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. And then when they changed the Public Utility Holding Company Act, they basically paved the way so that all of these companies could do mergers and acquisitions with very little oversight. The oil and gas industry is going through huge financial contraction right now, which is unbelievable that they're completely ignoring this. It's quite shocking. And the problem is that the utilities, along with the regulators, which include state level regulators as well as FERC, are basically ignoring everything. And because the process is complex, expensive, and difficult in the sense that it takes quite a lot of energy and time to participate in a meaningful way, they are basically shutting out any discussion at all. Here in North Carolina, where I'm at, where Duke Energy, one of the biggest utilities in the country, operates, we don't even have hearings. It's really quite shocking. And so basically, I'd say that our nightmare, unfortunately, has come true, where the regulators are utterly captured by the industries that they are supposed to regulate. And as a former advisor to a commissioner, I don't say that lightly, but this is what I've seen and this is what I've experienced. And unfortunately, as the cost of solar, the cost of wind, the availability of efficiency, those have come down, 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 down. But rather than engage in constructive discussions, the utilities and the regulators just stop any discussion at all. So the good news is that clean energy is available and it's cost effective. The bad news is that the regulators and industry are standing in the way.
Great. Well, thank you. That's a great overview, sort of how we get here. Dr. Howarth and I were talking at the end of our conversation a little bit about how some of those rules are changing right now. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned some of the early failures that the system is sort of designed to fail right from exempting fracking from the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and regulations like that. Is there any progress being made with some of these new rules coming out of the Obama administration to try and regulate leaks of methane, for example?
Well, unfortunately, the rule that they're engaged in right now...
Pollution from the electricity sector.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Yes, the problem, they have started a rulemaking, but it's only for new wells. And that's a big problem. So if we're only going to address new wells, that means that the hundreds of thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of fracked gas wells, and then many, many more hundreds of thousands of fracked oil wells, those are exempt. And that's where the problem is. So unfortunately, the EPA is dragging its feet, and they're not addressing the problem, which is existing wells. To follow up on what Dr. Howarth said, with the high leakage rate and the complaint that NC Warren filed with the EPA OIG, that the test results that show what the leakage rates are wrong. Those test results are bad test results. Rather than take a look at that, they just throw that information under the bus and ignore it. And so if we have a leakage rate that is 2, 3, 4, even 7 or 10%, any climate value of natural gas is simply out the window. So where the utility industry and even our regulators like to say, oh, wow, CO2 emissions from coal are way down. Well, yes, they are. But what they don't tell you is that CO2 emissions and methane emissions from natural gas pipelines, drilling, production, and power plants are way up.
That's a great point. And definitely one thing we've consistently created sort of cumulative impacts or the sort of life cycle impacts of some of these major facilities and infrastructure projects that they're approving.
Yes, and that's a great point, because industry has gotten away with this for many, many decades, not just on natural gas, but on coal. And so they basically don't consider cumulative impacts, which is absolutely crazy. And so we're basically playing a shell game. So it used to be that they'd say, well, gee, solar and wind and efficiency aren't cost effective. Well, now they are, but they're finding other ways to game the system. And, you know, cumulative impacts, just like life cycle analysis. This is how we should be analyzing every one of our energy sources, whether it's solar, it's wind, it's efficiency, it's coal, it's natural gas, it's nuclear. Let's not pick favorites. Let's look at the life cycle impacts of every single type of energy. And when we do that, clean energy wins far, far, far and away. Drew, if I can give you an example,
please,
of how crazy things are. I worked and lived in Arizona for many years, 25 years. Arizona is less than 4% solar and 40% coal. Those are some of the dirtiest, oldest coal plants in the country. It is a tragedy. Here in North Carolina, Duke Energy's plan is to be 4% for clean energy by 2029. That is a tragedy.
Yeah, definitely not setting the bar very high for success there, are they?
No.
Great. Well, any last thoughts on any particular, anything that citizen activists, because part of the reason we're holding this hearing is we think FERC should be hearing testimony from you and Dr. Howarth and many other folks out in the public who have very valid critiques of gas storage and gas infrastructure projects. What else can the public do to make sure that FERC and the EPA and these other regulatory agencies we've been talking about do hear the public's voice? Because it sounds like many of us have concerns about gas and about fracking as a technology, but so far the regulation hasn't caught up to the public's concern. What can we do to make our voices heard better?
It's so wonderful that you guys have chosen FERC, which has absolutely been under the radar. I mean, I think of FERC as a state PUC on steroids. And of course, because it's in DC, if you don't live there or live nearby, it's hard to participate. So I would say, especially for activists that are just joining in, to look at your own state, figure out what groups are doing what, and help them. Because just like FERC was under the radar, Drew, the state public utilities commissions are also pretty much under the radar. I mean, in some states like Arizona, Nevada, California, they're not. But in many states they are. And so, you know, here in North Carolina, where the Utilities Commission doesn't even allow you to watch the hearing online, you literally have to show up to a basement in Raleigh. That is simply not right. And we're a government by the people, for the people, of the people, and it's time for our regulators to start acting like it. And it's time for our utilities to quit not just ruining our planet, ruining our health, and ruining our environment, but polluting our democracy as well.
Great. But thank you so much for joining us for a little bit this morning. Keep up the good work in North Carolina. And Steve Norris is here with us this morning as well. We'll send him back to you in North Carolina shortly.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Great work.
Let's see. So joining us next on the line will be John Dennis, who is a researcher who's been looking at Crestwood's gas storage facility, proposed gas storage facility in Seneca Lake, New York. He'll be weighing in more about some of the particulars, challenges of that facility. Folks have probably seen many of the protests, including direct action protests where folks have actually been arrested blocking the driveway into the Seneca Lake construction site. But there's a lot more to that project, and John's going to tell us some more about it. Hang on 1 minute while we get John on the line. Okay, so joining us in just a minute will be John Dennis, an independent researcher looking at the Crestwood proposed facility in Seneca Lake, New York. 1 minute while we get John online. So we wait for John to join us here. If you're just tuning in, this is the Beyond Extreme Energy Live webcast from right outside the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which today has been holding a hearing about the Aliso Canyon gas storage facility in California. We thought it was troubling that despite having a whole hearing on Aliso Canyon, FERC was focusing on the impacts to the corporate operation of the facility. And it's clear from the testimony they've heard so far and the way that they're the questions that they're asking of their witnesses, that their intention is really to get back to business as usual as soon as possible. We believe they should consider the public health impacts of gas storage, the full life cycle impacts of gas from the fracking wellhead to the transmission process, the pipelines, the gathering lines, all of those pieces, and especially the climate change impacts of all that gas. Because as we've heard from several folks already, one of the big problems with gas transmission and storage is that it is a very leaky process. And to date, the agencies that are supposed to oversee and regulate that, like the EPA and FERC, have done a very bad job of estimating how much gas is leaked. It's a problem because methane, the main component in natural gas, is an incredibly potent global warming pollutant, much more potent than CO2, which is what we usually talk about with global warming. So as a result of these agencies underestimating the amount of leakage that's happening and the dramatically greater impact of that leaked methane on the atmosphere, you end up with a sort of double whammy for the climate, where facilities like Aliso Canyon, as well as a number of gas pipelines and storage facilities either proposed or already existing around the country, are huge impactors on the climate, but are not well regulated, not well considered in that effect. Joining us now, is John Dennis from Crestwood, looking at the Crestwood facility near Seneca Lake. John, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, Drew.
Hi. So you may have heard me just sort of giving a little recap here. Folks were inside the FERC hearing earlier. There was no opportunity for the public to comment. There was no public comment taken at the hearing, so folks invited themselves to participate, stood up and spoke out about the need for FERC to do a better job considering the climate impacts of facilities like Aliso Canyon and also the full life cycle analysis of storage facility projects. But tell us a little bit about the facility you've done so much research on up near Seneca Lake, New York.
Well, sure. Actually, I'd like to start by mentioning that FERC reapproved a 2-year construction certificate that they initially approved in 2014, and they did so without any opportunity for public comment, despite knowing that about 32 different municipalities and counties in central New York are very much opposed to this gas storage project and the expansion of it. So we've been looking at this project for about 2 years, and in some ways, it poses more risks than the Aliso Canyon well SS-25 that failed last October. According to John K. Warren, who's a preeminent global authority on salt formations, there is a higher rate of failures at salt caverns than in depleted reservoirs, which is what failed at SoCalGas's Aliso Canyon. It's also important to note that well SS-25, the one that failed at Aliso Canyon, was drilled in 1953. 2 of the wells at Access Gallery 1 at Seneca Lake were drilled in 1957, so they're very similar in age. And whether or not a new liner is put down an antiquated, old brine hole, there's still the matter of the cement between the casing and the formation. Back in the 1950s, they didn't have the special additives which are needed to prevent the cement from fixing too quickly when it becomes contaminated with salt. So that there's a good chance that at least 2 of these boreholes going down into Gallery 1 have technical problems. I'd also note that in Europe, they require downhole shutoff valves on all of their gas storage wells. We don't require that in this country. So, we're just looking at a situation that's less safe. Similarly, these boreholes, these wells, are exempt from EPA supervision. So we're basically relying on corporate self-supervision. The New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation is very underfunded. They don't have the staff to really go out and check on these wells personally. They really rely on the companies to self-report and self-enforce. And in the case of Aliso Canyon, we know that SoCalGas was pushing gas up through the inner tubing, which is the way it's supposed to be done, and through the outer tubing, the so-called annulus, where there's only one layer of protection. So if there's a leak, out it goes and it becomes uncontrollable. We don't know whether that same technique could be practiced here at Seneca Lake, because without good supervision, you just don't know. And so going forward, we think, first of all, this Gallery 1 should be decommissioned and retested. For instance, there's one well that goes down into it, which was abandoned in 1985. There are no records indicating the quality of the plugging and abandonment, yet it's very, very expensive to re-drill an old plugged and abandoned well and check it out, run sonar, do various things with it, and then plug it again. So the companies do this kicking and screaming when required to. So we'd like to see this operation not, FERC has approved an expansion. We actually many of us feel that it should be decommissioned completely and checked. And Norwegian researchers have recently found that it may be more efficient for fracked gas wells simply to be managed, to have the incentives for the producers to shut those wells in until the gas is needed. You really don't need storage, underground storage in the midstream between the production wells and electricity generating stations.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there are a lot of sort of common sense reforms. One might say is shut off valves, using the fracking wells themselves to store the gas instead of pooling it in these storage facilities before it goes to market or to power plants. Right. What's your experience been, presenting those kind of options to FERC as a regulatory agency? Are they open to those ideas? Are they considering those kind of options? Or are they, as we've heard from some other folks, mostly sort of full scream ahead, approving?
They don't seem to listen. We really haven't had the opportunities to present more evidence to them. So, they're not good listeners, unfortunately. And I was on an EPA conference out in Colorado recently about underground gas storage, and I was astonished how many industry professionals still seem to think that you could bring gas up through the annulus without posing a risk. That would never be allowed in Europe. So, why our industry hasn't learned from Aliso Canyon, it's really a bit shocking how slow we are. And we don't have uniform national standards. Texas has one set of standards, Oklahoma another, California, has their own. It's very balkanized. Drew, I'm not hearing you right now.
All over the country. So your fight is connected to the Aliso Canyon fight is connected against pipelines and against the fracking wells in Pennsylvania. How can folks rally around you and what you guys are doing in Seneca Lake, and what can we all do to work better together?
Seneca Lake is a remarkably small storage area. So, we've been very forceful about that because Seneca Lake is the largest freshwater drinking water supply in all of New York that's completely within the state. And yet, shutting that down alone is not adequate. We really need to work together to work against fracked gas infrastructure throughout the Northeast. The Dominion pipeline, for instance, is an example of a nearby asset, which if Governor Cuomo should deny the 401 water quality certificate for that project, it would be dead. So we need to keep calling the governor and urging him to deny those 401 water quality certificates for gas projects all over New York State, and similar actions in other states.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us this morning for a minute. Sorry, we have to leave it here for right now, but we're going to move on to our next guests. Thanks. This has been John Dennis, who's a researcher looking at the Crestwood facility in Seneca Lake, New York, a sort of proposed expansion of a gas storage facility in upstate New York. Thanks for being with us, John.
Thank you, Drew. It's a pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye. Joining us next in just a minute is going to be Michael Badges Canning, who's an activist BXE has worked with for a long time in Western Pennsylvania. Michael really lives in the shale fields and works with a number of different organizations in Western Pennsylvania that are fighting fracking at the wellhead and also along the pipelines and gathering lines that move that gas to market, eventually to the storage facilities we've been talking about in places like Aliso Canyon and Seneca Lake and other places. So Mike will be on with us in just a moment and can give us a little report right from the shale fields. Meanwhile, for those of you who are just tuning in, this is the Beyond Extreme Energy live webcast from right outside FERC. We're sitting here just about a block down from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which earlier today was holding a hearing, or still today is holding a hearing on the Aliso Canyon gas storage facility in California, but did not invite public comment. You can see there's a couple of us on. Some of these folks were already inside the FERC meeting and were able to disrupt that proceeding a little bit and ask some questions, even though there was not a formal time for public comment. And we're holding our own people's hearing live on the internet to try and get the testimony out that we think FERC should be listening to, whether it's from the shale fields in Pennsylvania, from proposed facilities in North Carolina and New York, and right from California. Joining us at the end of the call will be some activists from Save Porter Ranch, the organization that organized around the evacuation of the Porter Ranch neighborhood, which is in and around the Aliso Canyon storage facility. So lots more coming up. Stand by with us for just a minute and we'll get Michael on the phone next.
Yeah, talk so us. Good.
So joining us now, I see you coming on, Michael. Bagdis Canning from, where should we say you're from today, Michael? You work with a number of groups there in Pennsylvania.
Marcellus Outreach Butler, where I live in Butler County, Pennsylvania.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit. First of all, we've been hearing all morning from different folks all along the kind of life cycle of gas production and infrastructure. We've heard from folks in North Carolina. We've heard from folks in upstate New York. You're our first Pennsylvanian on the call this morning. Tell us how things are in Western Pennsylvania, where the gas is fracked oftentimes.
Oh, it's pretty ghastly. Let me tell an older story. I mean, a year ago, Karen and I went out in our patio to look at the blood moon, the eclipse of the blood moon, and I could see the moon, but I could also see this ominous glow to the north. And what it was a cratty well, flaring. I mean, someone talked about the flaring thing, and that supposedly has disappeared, but there's all kinds of ways around it. The industry can get around it. So this cratty well was flaring, and the cratty well is 400 yards from my granddaughter. She was sleeping right there. A flaring well spews all kinds of toxins out into the atmosphere. A couple days later, the well's still flaring. We had a stalled system right over, a weather system over our area, and my granddaughter was having all kinds of respiratory problems. So I called our Department of Environmental Protection, which we in the shale fields call Don't Expect Protection. And I talked to their air quality person, and he told me he'd be out. And I said, well, when you're coming out, let me know. And so nothing happened that day. The next day, Karen went by the site and saw the DEP was there. So I went over and I talked to him. And he was there examining the site with his very high-tech instrument. And he said that the site was in perfect compliance with DEP's regulations. His instrument was his naked eye. All he could see was the flare, and that was good. So we got that. But fracking is much more than just the air issues. I have friends in the Woodlands, which is another part of Butler County, who have been without water now for 5.5 years. Every Monday, they go to the White Oak Springs Presbyterian Church to pick up 20 to 25 gallons of water. Their water was contaminated by 7 well pads. It surrounds their 400-acre community. That's 50 families every week on Monday go to pick up 20 to 25 gallons of water. And when you think about what 20 to 25 gallons of water is, it's not a lot to brush your teeth, to drink, to feed to water your pets and all that. They're still dealing with it. And the interesting thing is the state of Pennsylvania has something called an impact fee that the drillers are supposed to pay for every impact. And Butler County and the communities around the Woodlands have gotten millions and millions of dollars of impact fees, but not a penny has gone to the real impact with them. We've got other things. I mean, I could go on and on, Drew. We have Summit Elementary. I got a call from a mother at Summit Elementary in September of last year saying that there was a flaring well going on next to the school. The Kozik brothers well is 700 feet from the school building. So I went over and to assess the situation, and I was horrified to see a gym class with 500 kids. Not 500 kids, with kids playing soccer 500 feet from this flaring well. I called the Southwestern Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project and asked them, was this something to be concerned about? And they immediately issued a health advisory. I sent it to the superintendent. He assured me that they would come in and that they'd take the kids inside. So I went on a bike ride, and I came back, and an hour later they were back outside. And when the superintendent was interviewed by the local paper, he said that our Department of Environmental Protection, Don't Expect Protection, was assured him that there was no problems with flaring wells. Now, I listened to several of your previous speakers, and we have captured agencies. FERC's one certainly, but our Department of Environmental Protection is another. We have 17 schools in Butler County that are within a mile of drilling sites, and that's bad news. So we've had a number of research projects come out in the last few years looking at proximity to wells and all types of maladies. Proximity to a well site is a mile. And we have kids that are exposed, 17 that are within a mile, so they're exposed to all kinds of stuff, and that's things like problem pregnancies, asthma, cardiac admits, migraines, the list is on and on. And then there's another problem too, and this is that wells and drilling and gas aren't the only problem. Wells also produce tremendous amounts of waste. And the school where my kids and my grandkids will go, my kids went, my grandkids will go, is a repository for this waste, which is unfortunately radioactive. And again, I can watch truck after truck after truck after truck all day long delivering this radioactive waste, and nobody knows. Nobody in the community knows about it. It's nuts.
Thank you. We're losing just a little bit of your story at the end there. Sorry, we're having a little technical hiccup on our end. But I certainly appreciate all the things you're saying about tremendous health impacts, especially children really in the front lines of the fights, living next to flaring, living next to the well pads. What kind of reaction you were talking about the Pennsylvania?
I lost you, Drew. You've disappeared. I can't hear you. I can see you. You're frozen. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, we were out just for a minute there.
Out again.
With Michael for a minute.
There you go. I hear you again.
There we are. Sorry about that. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, broadcast from Beyond Extreme Energy. Apologies, we're having a little audio quality issue. It's not easy broadcasting live people's hearings from this. And get Michael back. Get Michael back in just a minute. Hey there. I think we're back. Apologies for the brief technical interruption there. We had a little signal outage here at the front doorstep of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I think we are back online again. We're going to try and bring in our last guest or two. Karen Ferridan is the first from Pennsylvanians Against Fracking. Give us a quick report, and then we're going to try and get our last two guests in here in the next 10 minutes. Again, if you're just joining us, this is the Beyond Extreme Energy live webcast from the front doorstep of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We've been talking all morning about things FERC is not considering but should about the impacts of gas and fracked gas storage in particular. So stand by with us for a minute as we pull up our last guest or two and get ourselves going here again. Sorry for the brief outage there. Hey, I see Karen just joining us now. How are you?
It wasn't connecting. I'm really sorry to be late.
That's okay. We were having a little outage on our end as well. So welcome, Karen Ferdin from Pennsylvanians Against Fracking. Tell us a little bit about how things are in Pennsylvania.
Well, Pennsylvania tends to be the ground zero of fracking for a lot of people who come here to see what not to do. And so things are continuing pretty much apace. We have a lot of drilling going on as always, but we also have a lot of pipeline proliferation. And, you're sitting in front of the place that makes all of that possible.
Absolutely. So folks were inside earlier talking at FERC, since we're not really allowed to talk with them. They don't invite a lot of public commentary. But one of the things that folks were bringing up while they were in that hearing room was the idea that FERC doesn't usually consider the sort of cumulative impacts, especially the cumulative climate impacts of projects that they review and approve. And I know you've been looking at some new research about the climate impacts from methane leakage in Pennsylvania. Tell us a little bit about that and what FERC should be considering when they're looking at the real life cycle of climate impacts from these kind of projects.
Well, interestingly enough, the Pennsylvania DEP recently put out an annual report, and government data always lags behind. So when they reported on methane emissions from oil and gas drilling, they were referring to data from 2014. And so when I saw the number from 2014, I started searching around to find some way of talking about it to make it relatable. And so in my search, I stumbled upon an article about Aliso Canyon, which I know they're talking about today at FERC and the purpose of your show. And so I'm reading the article about Aliso Canyon, and the scientists, after that 4-month leak finally came to an end, found a way to quantify it in a way that was relatable. And so they said that basically what had happened over the course of that 4 months with all the methane leaking was that 500,000 cars were put on the road, the equivalent of that. And the thing that made the article especially interesting to me is that because the amount of methane that leaked from Aliso Canyon over the course of 4 months was exactly the amount of methane that leaked in Pennsylvania in 2014, 110,000 tons. Now, Aliso Canyon elicited a lot of public attention because it was such a dramatic event coming from a single source. In Pennsylvania, that's business as usual because it's coming from many, many sources. It's not nearly as dramatic as having schools evacuated and communities evacuated. It's just how things go every day in Pennsylvania. And the other thing that was dramatic about that number for me was that it only represented a 1% increase over the previous year in Pennsylvania. And so where Aliso Canyon was a one-time terrible event, we contribute 500,000 cars to the road every year. In 2013, it was 1% less than 2014, but basically a lot. And we've been fracking for over a dozen years in Pennsylvania.
Sort of a slow motion crisis still unfolding. Michael Badge is canning a little bit earlier about some of the impacts he was talking about flaring next to schools. I know that that's a big issue that Pennsylvanians Against Fracking has been working on. Tell us a little bit about what you've been trying to do to try and move wells back from public schools and other places where children are present, and why that's an important issue in Pennsylvania.
Well, I should give credit to the Protect Our Children Coalition that has been working on that specific issue. But I was part of that coalition for a long time, and I can tell you that there are many, many schools within 2 miles of drilling, within a half mile even. And so the air quality at those school campuses can be very terrible, and it's not as simple as keeping kids in from recess or something on bad air quality day. The problem is that institutional buildings use HVAC systems to replace stale indoor air with fresh, outdoor air, except the fresh air coming in from outdoors is toxic air coming off of well pads. And so we're in compressor stations and all the other infrastructure because it leaks from all of it. So if you're too close to that and you're going to school, you're being held captive in your school. And so what a lot of parent groups have started forming around is keeping these wells away from schools, and the Protect Our Children Coalition has been working hard to help those groups get established and fight their fights. But it's a real uphill battle. There was one example in Pennsylvania of the Mars Parent Group where 6 wells were going to be put a half-mile away from an entire school district campus of 3,500 or so kids and faculty and everyone else. And, you know, you couldn't evacuate the students fast enough if there had been an explosion at one of those wells. But day in and day out, you have a toxic air quality problem that those kids are going to have to be exposed to if those wells get built. And I know there's been a lot of fighting going on to keep that from happening, but we don't always win. The DEP approved those wells, so who knows what.
Absolutely. So a big and ongoing problem in Pennsylvania and a number of other states as well. I'm actually running low on battery, so I'm afraid I'm going to cut us a little bit short so I can get to our last guest, Richard Matthews from Save Porter Ranch. But before I give him a quick call, any last words for FERC and the federal agencies here in D.C. From Pennsylvania? What would you like to see FERC do better?
Stop approving pipelines. We don't need them.
Simple statement. Well, thanks, Karen. Sorry to be a little brief with you.
Okay.
But thanks for being on with us. So we're going to get our last guest on the phone today before I completely run out of battery, which is Richard Matthews. He's a board member at Save Porter Ranch. One moment while I give him a call. I may be out of battery, like just now. Can I plug into that thing? Well, it's not my phone, it's my computer challenge. We'll see. See how long I get out of 1%.
It won't work.
It's not my phone, it's the computer that I need to plug in.
Yeah, it should be able to. If you have a cord, it should be
I do?
able to charge a little bit.
Like that? Hey, Richard, is that you? Hey, welcome. Hang on one second. I'm very low on battery, so we may lose you sort of at any moment. But let me try to get you on for as many minutes as I can here. I can good news. And that's the main thing we'll need. 1 second. Well, if you can hear us. Oop, you still there, Richard? Okay, great. So tell us a little bit about what's been going on at Porter Ranch, and if I lose you, apologies. We'll try and call you back in just a few minutes when I can get somewhere with a power supply.
Ranch is a community that is part of the city of Los Angeles. Aliso Canyon is just outside the city boundary on the edge of the San Fernando Valley, which is home to 1 million people.